Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
All right. So, hey, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining the Great Lakes Tech Leaders discussion for this week. We're going to be talking about application logging. So yeah, let's just do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll just dive right into the topic. Myself, I'm Jason Brown. I'm a cloud solutions architect with Right Brain Networks. Phil, did you want to go next?
Yep. I'm a cloud solutions engineer with Right Brain Networks.
And Joe?
And I'm a business development associate here at Right Brain Networks.
And Tom?
Tom Kowalski, chief architect at Daysmart Software, and I've actually worked with some of you before with Right Brain. So good to see you and talk to y'all again.
Yeah, good to talk to you too. It's a pleasure having you on. So yeah, I guess so. You had selected the topic for this week, which was application logging. It sounds like you had a few ideas that you wanted to bring to the table, and yeah, I was thinking maybe that if you wanted to kick off the discussion, we could all take it from there.
Sure. I mean, I think I just suggested it because the last time we were talking, I thought it was about application logging, and really more focused on like config change logging, things like that, right? Your cloud trail changes going on. So yeah, I am very intrigued in all things logging, and I'm also intrigued too that you called it centralized logging. I was wondering what that meant to you all.
Yeah, absolutely. So for at least for me, a common problem that I typically see with a lot of people that we talk to is when there's a problem somewhere in my system, what happened and how do I fix it quickly, right? The days of huge monolithic apps are pretty much gone now, in favor of a multitude of smaller distributed components that are working together to provide a solution. And so when you have a lot of these different components that are spread out amongst multiple or duplicated among multiple environments, it can kind of get messy when you're diving through logs to find a specific issue, like a specific error, or trying to triage or diagnose a problem. So the solution for that is to have a single pane of glass where you can see everything that's going on in your environment. And that's what we typically refer to as centralized app logging, or just centralized logging. There is a distinction that we typically make between infrastructure logging and app logging. So, if I have a lot of different components that are running in Docker containers, for example, and I want to know what the health of the Docker container itself is, that would be more along the lines of infrastructure logging, whereas application logging is more about what is happening inside my apps. Like, how is the data being handled? What's happening with the business logic, and how is it performing? So typically you see several different there's a general architecture that people follow. So when you have a lot of different apps that are logging with, if it's just running on an EC2 instance, or like a traditional server, or in Docker containers, or what have you, you would have your app logging to a specific place, and then you would have a component that would collect all of these logs. That would either be called a collector or a forwarder, and then they would push these logs over to what's known as an indexer, which will retrieve all of the different logs and index them into your wherever you're going to have your centralized log storage. And then on top of that, you have a visualization layer where you can perform queries to um, analysis on what's actually happening within the environment. So yeah, there's a
Okay.
lot. Yeah.
So you threw out a few words there, like within your environment, app and component. So the reason why I asked like what's centralized is where's the boundary of that? And where I'm coming from is, we want teams to kind of own, their specific applications. And what we mean by that is kind of break it down by the persistent storage. Anything that can access, a database is all one application. And we try to keep that self-contained. And then there's also, we're acquiring different companies, right? That all have different apps and, and their different environments. And it's just kind of hard to define the boundary of what's centralized, right? Like everybody has to, send everything to this one place, or do you let, the different teams decide and, what technology they're using and what's best for them. So I'm just, for me, it's just kind of hard defining that boundary of what's centralized, right? With the different workloads of, the apps to, that are working together with each other. So yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, like centralize everything in the entire company, like all the applications, or where do you define your boundaries?
Right. I mean, that's a really good question, and it really depends on the organization, like how your organizational units or business units are composed within your organization, like how siloed off they are, or like if you have apps that are completely self-contained that don't interact with any other apps, maybe there would be an obvious distinction there where you'd want to keep something like that separate. Typically, though, what we see is that most organizations we talk to want to have some kind of a single place where all of the app logs for all of their applications will flow into, whether or not certain apps are talking to certain other apps. It's when it comes to um, diagnosing and triaging issues that are happening, being able to search through all of the different apps that belong to the app, to the organization. It can be a very helpful thing, but is it necessary? Not for everybody. It definitely can be tailored to the needs of your organization. Um, so, but what's nice is that with a lot of these types of solutions, like industry standard solutions like Splunk, or having an elk stack, you can filter in such a way as to um, for permissions, for example, right? If you only want one team to be able to view or access one set of data, it's actually there are mechanisms in place where you can tailor what people can see or query for within your central solution. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So that kind of comes into the next question, right? Of the, environment boundaries, right? Of the prod, non-prod, who can see what, right? And where you segment that as well, right? Do you stand up completely separate solutions, or do you rely on, right, those mechanisms of the permissions of, you can only search, right, in this context, but it's all like the same, centralized solution?
Right. Yeah. That's a really good question. So, because a lot of times we'll see different environments, like your prod, your pre-prod, test, and dev, and they can be in completely separate, if you're using AWS, for example, they could be in completely separate accounts. Like having that layer of separation between those environments is a good thing. But like, what do you do then? Do you have, you're rolling out, a logging solution in each account? Well, what we've typically done in the past is we would have a separate account set up from those called your shared services account or your shared services environment that would be able to receive data from any one of the other accounts securely, of course. But that is where you'd have your logging solution spun up. And then when you have an app component that wants to log and forward its logs out to your centralized logging solution, like your Elk Stack, you'd also be sending things like, what's the name of the component, what environment is it in, is it dev or prod or whatever. And the timestamp, of course, like a lot of different information, so that that can be filtered upon very easily later on when somebody's looking at the visualization and performing searches on the data, right?
Yeah. And that all makes sense. I guess the next thing with that, right, is do you differentiate between like your logs where you're pretty sure there's not going to be any PII in there, right, versus debug logs, or do you kind of treat them the same, or do you rely on any like scrubbing mechanisms? Or
That's a really good question, and it's kind of a complicated answer. I mean, there's a lot of different routes you can take with that, right? So first, I will say that if you have logs that are containing any kind of PII, you definitely want to make sure that wherever you're going to be querying from the data, you'd have to lock that down very securely. So, you for your Elk Stack, for example, if you're using like Elasticsearch, well, it's called OpenSearch now, with Kibana on top, you want to make sure that somebody running the searches in Kibana wouldn't be able to have access to that kind of data. So there are ways which you can restrict that kind of access and what they can see and filter on, and you want to make sure that you'd screen out that data for the role of the person that's going to be accessing it. And also too, another way you can slice it is through your different log levels, right? I mean, it would take some enforcement, but you could say that you brought up debug logging, right? So like if you have a layer that's extremely detailed, I mean, you it is something that's potentially sensitive, containing something sensitive, whereas having your regular just info logs, just make sure to screen all of that stuff out before even logging that to like pushing that out through your forwarder, right? So yeah, those are just a couple of different examples, but yeah, that's one that it takes a lot of discipline as well if you're doing it that way. Just in terms of having a policy that's enforceable like that.
Yeah, I mean, these are the challenges that we have, right? And it's kind of like, you want to centralize things, but then it's also like, okay, now, if you really centralize it, everything has to be treated like, production could have PII in it, right? So yeah, it's been like a balance for us, and right, just wondering how how other teams do it. So.
Yeah. Well, what about for you guys? Like, do you have a like a solution for each environment, or do you typically have a like a one like a single pane of glass that contains logs for your for all of your environments?
Yeah. So we initially started off with like an Elk Stack, right, and using AWS this is before it was, I think, even called OpenSearch. And we'd send everything over there, and we had some Kibana dashboards and things like that. But things were in different places, and it was just, hard to get the developers to get in there, right? They're used to their, right into a database that they have, right, and querying it. And so it was kind of hard to get it centralized that way. And we kind of stayed with that for a while. We moved to New Relic for performance monitoring and metrics, and then they came out with a lot better support for logs and support for HIPAA, right, compliance, sign a BA. So we've been moving a lot of stuff over there, and yeah, it's just the balance, right, of what can we move over there, and so right now it's usually not so much logs, right? If it's in production or our apps that are older, more legacy, the newer ones, more diligent about scrubbing things before they're sent out, and New Relic also provides things to like kind of see it and like scrub it for you or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at now. So it just depends on the different stages, the maturity of the apps themselves, and the teams working on them, of where things are, and how centralized it is. But trying to move everything to New Relic is where we're at right now.
Interesting. Yeah, that's so New Relic. I don't have any experience with personally, but I know that it is one of the industry standards now for for logging, infrastructure logging, and now app logging. Most of my expertise has been either in the traditional Elk stack or something I've also used in a recent project was using TimeStream to collect the data and store the data, and then having the Grafana as the visualization layer, which has been very interesting and successful. But yeah, that New Relic is one I have not had a lot of experience in personally, and I know a little bit of Splunk, but which is also an industry standard as well. But so yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned though that it's actually New Relic's able to scrub out some of the data like as it's being ingested. Like I know that with when you're ingesting logs, either pushing it through the forwarder or having the indexer transform it. I mean, there's some ETL like job to actually get it into the format it needs to be where you're storing it. But that's really nice that New Relic, you're able to define like what what it should be screening out. Is that something that you just configure, or something that you'd have to do you like write an ETL job as part of it, or?
So it's just like basic that they have in there. Most of what we do is we try to make sure that only the info logs are going over there, and then yeah, anything that's debug stays in. These are mostly new things, right? So they'll stay in CloudWatch. So these are usually Lambda functions. They're logs. So, and then it also gets expensive too, dumping that over. So try to keep it, just enough to like, the balance, right, of too much information, not enough. So to like monitor things in production, it's usually just kind of like the info layer, right, and it's kind of rely on like our own scrubbing. But I don't know like the detailed mechanisms on the New Relic side, but I know they do it with like the SQL commands. Before that, they would kind of like scrub that out, like the values going in there and things like that when they would record it. So
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a good point too. I mean, that's one thing that I've heard consistently about Splunk is that like it's really great. You typically just set it and away it goes, but it can really rack up the bill. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
because
sorry, go ahead.
you're usually paying twice, right? It's like what's going into that service, and then AWS doesn't like data coming out of AWS, so
Right.
that's the other bill as well.
Yeah, so that can get pretty expensive. So it's interesting, yeah, that you were able to come up with a way to to keep costs down, but still allow that centralized logging, that flow to be able to troubleshoot your prod-like environments.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's that balance, right, of like the cost and security and just, the ease. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that's something that like one of the considerations for the project that I was just on was cost. And they also have, well, most of their architecture set up as a series of Lambda functions. And that was like the big question was like we need better visibility into what's going on with the environment, because when we're going from one Lambda to the next, if something gets lost, we need to be able to track what happened. And there was a lot of different things that we explored in terms of what would be the right fit for them. And we ended up landing on TimeStream, which is just a time series database to store the data, and being able to just push all of the logs from CloudWatch into that using a fire hose, and then using Grafana as the visualization layer, just configuring the different data sources, from the different environments, to the time stream data sources. And what was nice, that what I really liked about that is it gave a lot of control over who had access to the data, who could make requests, and what types of data could they see through the Grafana visualizations. And it was all configurable through Terraform as well. We were able to use Terraform to do that, using infrastructure as code. So not having to, come up with a whole bunch of visualizations by hand. We could just have that template be deployed through Terraform and have that set up.
So how does the searching work? Is it like indexing it all for you on different things, or do you have to make sure everything's in JSON format and it's how does it? I haven't done too much with that.
So you're talking about searching through Grafana, or how it's moved into TimeStream, like the format?
Both.
Okay, yeah. So with Grafana, like the powerful thing about it is being able to come up with very detailed visualizations, and you can do some searching on it. It allows for SQL-like requests, or SQL-like queries, and you can easily set up tables, charts, graphs. I mean, any kind of visualization that you want. But the temporal component is extremely important, and that's why one of the reasons why we went with TimeStream. And yeah, putting it in TimeStream, I think if I remember correctly, it was taking the information and the logs and then transforming it, I think, into JSON. I have to double check. But once it gets into TimeStream, you can just make SQL queries almost like you would just make queries to a regular database, and have it pull the information out. And it's got added functionality for aggregation and counts. And yeah, it's definitely been it's been interesting to put into place there. But
Okay. So the reason why I'm asking is with New Relic, everything that you send over there in a log, if you put it in a JSON format, they'll automatically index every property and value for you. And then even give you autocomplete, right? When you're doing your searches. So I was just wondering, right, how that would be set up. Do you have to be very I don't know, thoughtful right in the beginning of how you're sending the logs over there and what you're sending?
Well, yeah, you bring up a good point, which is something that we've run into before. Is if we have a certain number of attributes, right? Like JSON attributes or keys, and then later we find out that, oh, we want to add more keys. There you would have to make sure to take into account some of the records that have already been processed, because some of the queries that we had run after adding new keys, it would throw an error saying that like the attribute's empty, right? So
Uh,
yeah, which that ended up being a pain, just kind of like a learning experience that we had to get over and get through in the beginning. But yeah, selecting like what you want to track is something that's pretty important. And I think that's something across the board too, not just with like logging something to time stream, but um, knowing what you want your indexes to be ahead of time, like what type of information you're going to be querying for, is a good thing to think about when like standing up something like Splunk or an Elk Stack.
yeah, yeah, because it's nice that it automatically does the indexing for us, right? In New Relic, the problem is it's like the Wild West. You don't know, is it customer ID one word or a dash or an underscore, right? Or it's in different spots. So it's like the yeah, it's nice to not have to worry about the format ahead of time, but it's also like a pain, right? To not have it standardize of what you're going to be indexing on, what your properties are.
Right. Yeah. Because if you like later on, I mean, if you're trying to make like if you're making a query and you're trying to answer the question, where geographically are users making requests to my app from over the past 24 hours versus how many 500 errors is my app throwing in prod over the past hour. I mean, those are two very different questions and you're looking for in completely different for different information, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, it's good to kind of have an idea of like what type of uh, questions you're trying to answer with these.
yeah, yeah. It goes back to like centralizing. It's like, oh, it's great, but things aren't standardized across different components, and it's like you can't really you know join some information together unless you really know like the app and what it was, those properties that were set.
Right, and having that kind of standardization is nice when you can manage it.
Yeah.
Something that we ended up doing for this project that I'm discussing was so we were using lambdas, and one of the things that we ended up relying on was creating a custom lambda layer, and we had a logging module that we created that would pull some of that information from the Lambda based on a few different things like the Lambda's tags, the environment variables, to get things like, am I in dev or prod? So when the function would use the logging module that we had created, it would automatically fill in some of those things that it needed to add without necessarily having to rely on the developer to be aware of that information and accounting for it for what he's building. We built that module and then had that module deployed to all the lambdas, so we had that consistency.
Yeah, and New Relic does a really good job of that, right? The things that are kind of standard across that. It's when it comes down to like like usually like a user ID, right, or something like that, and like how that's formatted, um or getting like the tracing, right, IDs to be consistent across things.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to do a quick time check. We are coming up on time, but I just wanted to leave a few minutes here for any like closing thoughts or last items of discussion. Did you have anything that you wanted to conclude on, Tom?
No, I don't think that was good discussion there.
Yeah,
And then
I agree. All right. Anybody else have any closing thoughts? All right. Well, I guess with that, thanks. It was really good talking to you again, Tom, and
You too.
wish you well. And I hope to see you on more of these. This has been good.
Yeah, no, this is fun. I look forward to the team composition or something like that.
Oh
How
yeah,
teams are organized. Yeah, I'm excited for that one. I've been really involved with that for the past year or two. I'm thinking of how that's done. So
excellent. Yeah,
excited to
I
talk
know
about
that.
it.
Oh, sorry to cut you off there. Yeah, I know Hannah had posted the schedule on the Slack channel, and I think that's either going to be next week or the week after. But yeah, you could
Yeah.
check out the Slack channel to see when that one's going to be good. I'm looking forward to that one too. So,
We'll see
uh,
you there.
all right. Well, yep. Thanks everybody, and have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week.
Alrighty, thank you too.